What is a mainstream Adventist? I'm Sam Millen, and I'm an Adventist pastor in the Pacific Northwest. This is the second part in a series on mainstream Adventism. Today I want to focus on the seventh-day Sabbath. I want to begin by reading from Genesis chapter 2 and the first 3 verses. I'll read from the New Living Translation, which says, "So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. On the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation." So right here, I want to highlight that the Sabbath was introduced in the beginning, at creation, before the fall, before God's plan of redemption kicks in, before God makes a covenant with Abraham and his family to make them into a great nation so that all the nations of the earth may be blessed through them, through the Messiah. Before God gives the law, the Torah, to his people, to Israel, which of course includes the Sabbath. We read about the Sabbath in the fourth commandment in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11. There, the Sabbath is directly linked to creation. God's people are to rest because God is their creator. They are to rest because they are worshiping the Creator, not idols. And God rested on the seventh day. However, in the second reading of the law, in Deuteronomy chapter 5, the Sabbath commandment tells us that the Sabbath is also linked to redemption, because God did the work of redeeming his people from slavery in Egypt so that they could once again worship him. God delivered them. God saved them from bondage. And so the Sabbath is linked both to creation and to redemption in the Torah, in the law. How about Christians? So there are 4 views regarding the Sabbath amongst Christians today. The purpose of this video is not for me to debate with other Christians on which day the Sabbath should be honored, observed, kept holy. But briefly, as an overview, there are 4 views: no day, any day, Sunday, and the seventh day. So the group that says no day would be those who believe we no longer need to keep 1 out of 7 days because Jesus offers us the rest, the true rest that we need as Christians. And the Sabbath simply pointed to Jesus, and Jesus fulfilled the Sabbath, so there's no longer any need to rest on 1 out of every 7 days. Now, they are partially right. Mainstream Adventists believe that Jesus is at the center of the Sabbath, and the rest Jesus offers us is the true rest that we need as his people, as humans. We need the rest that Jesus offers us. But the Sabbath was introduced before the fall, before we needed a savior from sin. It's right there in Genesis chapter 2 at creation. And so the rest that Jesus offers us, we believe, does not mean that we no longer need to rest on the Sabbath. The second group would say any day, just pick a day out of 7 and that will be your Sabbath. They take a few passages from the writings of Paul, which Adventists would say specifically Paul is dealing with Jewish Christians who are arguing amongst themselves on days for fasting. Some would choose Tuesdays and Thursdays, while others preferred Wednesdays and Fridays. And Paul says, just pick any day. All days are equal. This group applies these passages to the seventh-day Sabbath. Just pick a day, any day out of 7, and that will be your Sabbath. The third group says the seventh-day Sabbath has now, for Christians, been replaced by the first day, by Sunday. They would say Sunday is the Christian Sabbath, and it is because Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday, and so we need to honor the resurrection by resting on the first day of the week, on Sunday. However, the Apostle Paul tells us in Romans chapter 6 how Christians honor the resurrection. It is not by resting on the first day of the week. It is actually through our baptism. When we are buried in the waters of baptism with Christ, we are then raised to new life with Christ. when we come up out of the water in our Christian baptism. And so baptism is how we honor the resurrection. And the fourth group, which includes Seventh-day Adventists, honors the seventh-day Sabbath because we believe it was introduced right at creation, so it's for all mankind, all of humanity, for all time. And when you look at the verses again in Genesis chapter 2, mankind was created on day 6, and the very first day of their existence, they were resting. It was the seventh day because God was resting. So obviously this wasn't the kind of rest that was required because of physical exhaustion. Well, God doesn't need to rest physically. God doesn't get tired physically. But even Adam and Eve hadn't really done anything when they were created. On the sixth day, the very next day, the first full day was the Sabbath. And so what is the rest that God created on the seventh day? What does it mean that God rested, and why are we to rest on the seventh day? I love what Ty Gibson says in his book, Refresh, Jesus, the Essence of Our Faith. After quoting Genesis 2, 1-3, Ty writes, what's being described here is not rest from physical exhaustion, for which sleep is required, but rest in the sense of satisfaction, for which enjoyment is required. God isn't tired. He's happy, pleased, and fulfilled. He's been giving, pouring out his energy to create. Now he has completed the task and is receiving back into himself the pleasure of reciprocated love from his creation, which is precisely his plan for us. We would be blessed first by receiving from him in a position of rest, and then we would engage in the expenditure of our energy to give out of ourselves back to him and to one another. And so the Sabbath places us in a position to receive. God was resting in terms of being in a position to receive love and satisfaction, joy, fulfillment from his good creation. And mankind started out by receiving, by placing themselves in a position to receive from God what God had done for them at that stage through creation, what God had done by creating this incredible world and this beautiful garden for them. They were placing themselves in a position to receive joy and fulfillment and satisfaction from what God had done for them before they were to expend any energy, before there was any output, any effort of mankind fulfilling our vocation of tending to the garden where God had placed us. And so you cannot give unless you first receive. And so the Sabbath places us in a position to receive. It is a space in time where we place ourselves from a position of constantly doing and working, expending energy, effort, output, instead of constantly doing, giving, we need to place ourselves in a position where we can receive, so that our work and our giving and everything we do and say will be as a response to what God has done for us through creation and also through redemption, through his work of redeeming us from sin, from bondage and slavery to sin. And that is the purpose of the Sabbath. When God declared the Sabbath holy, that word holy is very important, because to make something or someone, or in this case a day, holy means to set apart a day for a special purpose. And what is the purpose of the Sabbath? It is to place ourselves, just like God placed himself, in a position to receive what God has done for us. And that is why, in terms of salvation, Jesus is at the center of the Sabbath, because the rest Jesus offers us is only experienced when we place ourselves in a position to receive his free gift of salvation. In Matthew chapter 11, when Jesus offers us rest, when he says that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Back then, the Torah was referred to in terms of a yoke. The law was the yoke because it provided direction on how to love God and love one another. But if the law is misused as a means to salvation, if people are told they need to keep the law so that they will be saved, it becomes a heavy burden. It's a misapplication of the law. But Jesus says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart. Let me direct you, because I have fulfilled the law. I have done what the law was intended to do, to be a revelation of God's character of love. Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment and revelation of God's love. Let me direct you, let me teach you, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." When we experience the rest Jesus offers by placing ourselves in a position to receive the gift of salvation, then the expenditure of our works and effort and output and labor will be a response to what Jesus has done for us. And that is what the Sabbath is for. It's set aside for a special purpose to enable us to place ourselves in a position to receive by ceasing from our doing, so that we can receive what God has done for us. That is why Jesus is at the center of the Sabbath.